Tonight, stop scrolling and stay right here. Because what just happened inside the Supreme Court is the kind of political shock that can flip the entire national mood in a single moment. And I'm not saying that for drama. I'm saying it because in politics, the biggest shifts don't always come from rallies or debates. They come from decisions made in quiet rooms by powerful institutions. And just minutes ago, the Supreme Court delivered exactly that kind of bombshell, a decision that Democrats are treating like an unexpected gift, a rare moment of advantage that could not have arrived at a more perfect time for them. While Donald Trump, who usually acts like he's in complete control, appears to be reacting like a man who just got blindsided. Because when this news hit, it didn't land like ordinary legal paperwork. It landed like a message, and the message was simple. The system isn't bending the way Trump wants it to bend, and that is exactly why you're seeing what people are calling panic, because Trump's entire political identity is built on one thing above everything else: dominance, the image of a man who always wins, who always controls the story, who always forces the country to talk about him on his terms. And the moment the Supreme Court drops a ruling that disrupts that formula, it creates a crisis, not just in the courtroom, but in the narrative. And for Trump, the narrative is oxygen, because without control of the narrative, his base starts asking questions. The media stops reacting to him the way he expects. Donors become cautious, and his opponents gain momentum. And tonight, the reason Democrats are celebrating is because this ruling gives them something they've been hunting for, an institutional moment they can point to and say, this isn't just us talking anymore. This is the highest court in the land, moving in a way that limits Trump's options. And in a political era where trust is broken and truth is constantly debated, that kind of institutional validation is not small. It's massive because it shifts the psychological battlefield, and politics is often psychological warfare disguised as policy. So before we even break down what this decision means, you have to understand the emotional math of what just happened. Democrats didn't just win a legal point, they gained a perception advantage. And Trump didn't just lose a legal point, he lost a piece of his image, and image is his strongest weapon. And that's why this moment matters more than many people realize. Because Trump's campaign is not running like a normal campaign. It's operating like a war room, juggling legal battles, political messaging, fundraising, media strategy, and constant counterattacks. And for months, Trump has relied on a familiar method: delay, deny, attack, and dominate. Where every negative headline gets flipped into outrage, every courtroom problem becomes a fundraising pitch, and every institutional challenge becomes proof that they are coming for him. And in the past, that strategy has worked because Trump is not just a politician. He's a master of conflict performance. He understands how to turn tension into attention and attention into power. But the Supreme Court's bombshell disrupts that machine in a way that is extremely dangerous for him, because it introduces the one thing Trump cannot tolerate, a decision he cannot spin fast enough to regain control. Because the Supreme Court doesn't respond to his posts, it doesn't argue with him on television, it doesn't hold press conferences where he can dominate the room. It simply moves, and the country adjusts around it. And that's why Democrats are celebrating like they just got handed a political gift box wrapped in gold, because now they have a moment where they can step back and let the institution speak for them. And in the political game, the most powerful attack is the one you don't have to deliver yourself, the one that comes from a source that appears neutral. And that is exactly what makes this moment feel so heavy, so sudden, and so potentially decisive. Because whether you love Trump or hate Trump, you have to admit one truth: he is strongest when he controls the rhythm of the news cycle, when he dictates the conversation, when he forces the country to chase him. But tonight the rhythm shifted, and Trump is reacting in the way he always reacts when the rhythm shifts away from him, because Trump's reaction pattern is predictable, and that predictability is now being used against him. First, he dismisses the news as unfair. Then he attacks the legitimacy of the people behind it. Then he claims he is the victim of a rigged system. And then he uses that victimhood as a rallying cry to keep his supporters emotionally locked in. But here's the difference this time. This time it's the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is not a random opponent. Trump can easily bully in the public arena. It is the highest legal authority in the country. And when Trump attacks it too aggressively, he risks something he cannot afford to lose: The remaining credibility he still holds with independents and moderate voters who might not love Democrats but also don't want a country where every institution is treated like an enemy. And that's why this moment is so complicated, because Democrats are not celebrating only because of the ruling itself. They're celebrating because of what Trump is likely to do next, because Democrats know Trump's greatest weakness is his inability to appear calm under pressure, and when he lashes out, he may excite his base. But he also reminds the rest of the country why they are exhausted. And exhaustion is one of the most powerful forces in modern politics, because people don't just vote for policy. They vote for stability. They vote for peace. They vote for the feeling that life won't be a constant national emergency. And if the Supreme Court's decision creates the perception that Trump is losing control, Democrats will use that perception like a hammer, and they will hit it again and again, because momentum is a weapon. And once momentum starts moving in one direction, it becomes harder to stop. And that is exactly why this Supreme Court bombshell is being treated as a turning point, because it's not only a legal event, it's a political event, a messaging event, and a psychological event. And right now, Democrats are already shaping the story as the wall's closing in, while Trump is trying to shape the story as the system is attacking you. And the reason this battle matters is because the next phase of American politics is going to be decided by which story feels more believable to the average voter watching from the outside. And that average voter is not studying legal documents. They are watching reactions. They are watching tone. They are watching confidence. And they are watching fear. And if Trump looks fearful, if he looks rattled, if he looks like the Supreme Court just landed a punch he didn't see coming, then Democrats don't even need to do much. Trump will do the work for them by reacting the way he always reacts. And that is why we're seeing the word panic being used tonight. Because panic is not just screaming or posting online. Panic is the sudden shift from strategy to emotion. Panic is when your moves become impulsive. Panic is when you stop playing chess and start flipping the board. And if Trump enters that mode, it creates openings for Democrats that they've been waiting for. Openings to portray him as unstable. Openings to portray him as desperate. Openings to portray him as a man trying to fight reality itself. And here's where this gets even more serious. Because the Supreme Court doesn't operate in isolation, every ruling connects to a larger ecosystem of court cases, election rules, campaign strategy, and media narratives. And the ripple effects of this bombshell could influence how fast certain legal processes move, how certain arguments are framed, and how voters interpret what is happening. And that means tonight's decision is not a final chapter. It's a new chapter. And the question now is not simply who won today, but who uses today's win to dominate tomorrow. Because Democrats are already celebrating. But celebration is not victory. Celebration is just energy. And energy must be converted into strategy. And Trump may be panicking, but panic can also turn into aggression. And aggression is one thing Trump knows how to weaponize. So the real danger for Democrats is that they celebrate too early and underestimate Trump's ability to turn this moment into fuel. Because Trump's base thrives on the idea that he is being attacked by powerful forces. And the more powerful the institution, the more convincing the story becomes for them. And that's why the next 48 hours are going to be critical, because you're going to see Democrats attempt to present this Supreme Court bombshell as a proof point that the country is moving forward, while Trump will attempt to present it as proof that the country is being stolen from him. And whichever narrative dominates will shape the political mood heading into the next wave of campaigning. And this is why you should pay attention not only to what the Supreme Court did, but to what the political machines do next. Because tonight's ruling is a spark. And sparks can either light a controlled fire that warms you, or they can light an uncontrolled fire that burns everything. And America right now is standing in a political environment that is dry, divided, and dangerously flammable. And the reason this Supreme Court moment feels like a bombshell is because it landed on a battlefield that was already tense, already polarized, already waiting for the next explosion. And now that explosion may not be physical, but it will be political, and it will be loud, and it will be relentless. Because from this moment forward, Democrats will push the message that Trump is losing grip, and Trump will push the message that the system is rigged, and the country will be forced once again to choose between two realities. And in part two, we're going to break down exactly how Democrats are likely to weaponize this decision in the media, in fundraising, and on the campaign trail, how Trump's team will respond behind the scenes, and what the next big political flashpoint will be that could decide whether this Supreme Court bombshell becomes a short-term shock or the start of a long-term collapse for Trump's strategy. The reason Democrats are moving so fast to celebrate this Supreme Court bombshell is not just because they're happy, it's because they understand something most casual viewers don't. Political momentum is like weather. It can change in minutes, and when it changes, you either ride it or you get buried under it. And right now, Democrats see a rare opening to turn this ruling into a larger story that benefits them far beyond the legal world. Because the real game is not the courtroom, it's the country's perception of what is happening. And perception is what decides elections. So the first thing Democrats are doing, quietly, strategically, and very aggressively, is shaping the ruling into a narrative of stability and accountability. And they are doing it in a way that doesn't even require them to look like they're attacking Trump directly. Because when you can point to the Supreme Court and say, this is what the highest legal authority in America decided, you don't have to argue as hard, you don't have to shout as loud, and you don't have to risk looking partisan because the institution speaks for itself. That's why this moment feels like a gift to Democrats, because it allows them to shift from defensive politics to offensive politics, from reacting to Trump to framing Trump. And that is a major psychological change, because for years, Trump has forced Democrats to play defense, to constantly explain, to constantly respond, to constantly chase the chaos of the day. But tonight, Democrats can look at this ruling and say, we don't have to chase chaos anymore, because the system itself is drawing boundaries. And boundaries are the one thing Trump hates, because Trump's entire strategy relies on pushing boundaries until they break, pushing rules until they bend, and pushing reality until it becomes negotiable. So when the Supreme Court draws a line, it doesn't just create legal consequences, it creates narrative consequences. Because now, Democrats can speak to voters who are exhausted and say, look, we're not asking you to love us. We're asking you to choose order over chaos. And that message is designed not for the hardcore Democratic base, which is already locked in, but for the middle of the country, for independents, for swing voters, for people who don't watch politics like a sport but still feel the stress of living in a nation that seems permanently on edge. Democrats know that if they can convert this Supreme Court bombshell into a symbol of institutional control, they can pull those voters closer without even needing a perfect candidate, because the election becomes less about personality and more about stability, less about charisma and more about safety, less about ideology and more about peace of mind. That's why you're seeing Democrats celebrate so loudly, because they're not just celebrating the ruling, they're celebrating the opportunity to change the emotional theme of the election. Now, at the same time, behind the scenes, Democrats are preparing the next wave of messaging, and it's going to come in three directions: media framing, fundraising, and campaign pressure. In the media, they will push a storyline that makes Trump look reactive and unstable, because they understand that Trump's greatest weakness is not his base leaving him. It's the rest of the country seeing him as a constant national crisis. Democrats want every voter to feel that Trump is not just controversial, but exhausting, not just aggressive, but chaotic, not just loud, but dangerous to stability. And this Supreme Court ruling gives them the perfect opening to say, look at how he reacts when institutions don't obey him. Because that's the subtext Democrats want voters to absorb. Trump doesn't accept limits, he doesn't accept rules, and he doesn't accept accountability. And when the Supreme Court's decision becomes the backdrop, Trump's reaction becomes the spotlight. The second direction is fundraising, because Democrats know that nothing motivates donors like a clear moment of advantage. If Democrats can convince supporters that this ruling is a turning point, they can raise money off of it instantly. They will tell donors, this is the moment we push harder. This is the moment we expand the map. This is the moment we finish the job. And whether you agree with them or not, that kind of urgency works. The third direction is campaign pressure, because Democrats will now use this ruling to pressure Republicans to defend Trump. They want Republicans on camera, in interviews, at press conferences, answering uncomfortable questions. They want every Republican candidate forced to choose between the Trump base and the moderate middle. And that's where Democrats become most dangerous, because they don't always win by being loved. They win by forcing their opponents into impossible positions. And if Republicans are forced to defend Trump against a Supreme Court bombshell, it creates a risk. Defend him too hard, and you scare moderates, criticize him, and you anger the base. That trap is exactly what Democrats want, because a divided opponent is an easier opponent. But here's where the story becomes even more intense, because while Democrats are celebrating, Trump's team is not sitting still. Trump's camp understands that rulings like this can become political disasters if they are allowed to settle into the public's mind as Trump lost. Trump cannot allow that perception to harden. Trump's brand cannot survive a narrative of defeat. So his response will follow a very deliberate pattern, even if it looks emotional on the surface. First, Trump will attempt to delegitimize the ruling. He will suggest it's unfair, political, biased, or part of a larger conspiracy. Second, he will attempt to distract the media with a bigger controversy because Trump's survival skill is creating noise so the country cannot focus on the thing that hurts him. Third, he will attempt to reframe the ruling as proof that he is a fighter, that he is being attacked, that he is standing against powerful forces, and that only he can protect his supporters from those forces. And that is the core of Trump's political magic. He turns legal trouble into loyalty. He turns accountability into persecution. He turns consequences into a rallying cry. And that is why Democrats cannot afford to assume this Supreme Court bombshell automatically destroys Trump. It might damage him with moderates, yes, but it might energize his base even more, because his base does not view these moments the way Democrats view them. They view them as battles in a larger war. They don't see Trump as a normal politician who must follow normal rules. They see him as a symbol, and symbols don't lose power easily. So what happens next is a fight over interpretation. Democrats will say, this proves the system is working. Trump will say, this proves the system is rigged. And the public will be forced to decide which story feels real. But there is another layer here that makes this even more explosive. Trump's internal political environment is not calm. The Republican Party itself is under tension. Some Republicans want to move past Trump, but they fear his base. Some Republicans want to attach themselves to Trump completely because they believe he is still the only path to victory. And some Republicans are simply waiting to see what direction the wind blows. This Supreme Court bombshell forces that internal tension into the open. Because if Trump looks weakened, opportunists smell blood. And if Trump looks dangerous, loyalists double down. That means this ruling is not just a moment for Democrats to celebrate. It is a moment that could trigger power shifts inside the Republican Party. And that's where the drama gets real. Because the biggest threat to Trump has never been Democrats alone. The biggest threat to Trump is when Republicans decide that he is no longer the strongest option. Trump's power comes from fear and loyalty, and both of those are influenced by the perception of strength. If this Supreme Court bombshell creates a perception that Trump is losing grip, it could embolden rivals, donors, and power brokers to quietly explore alternatives. And Trump knows that. That's why his reaction matters so much. That's why he cannot look calm and accepting. He must look angry and defiant. He must project strength even when he feels pressure. Because the moment Trump looks like he can be defeated, people who were once afraid to challenge him become brave. And politics is full of people who pretend to be loyal until the moment loyalty becomes inconvenient. Now let's talk about why this moment is so dangerous for the country as a whole. Because regardless of whether you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent, the truth is this: America is living in an era where institutions are being tested. Trust is collapsing. People don't agree on basic facts. And every major ruling, every major decision, every major political event becomes a weapon. That means the Supreme Court is no longer just a court in the eyes of many Americans. It is a symbol, and symbols are fought over. Democrats will treat the ruling as proof of accountability. Trump will treat the ruling as proof of persecution, and that battle will intensify the emotional temperature of the country. That's why you see people celebrating and panicking at the same time. Because in America right now, every political win is also a cultural explosion. And Trump is not just a politician, he is a cultural force. So when the Supreme Court drops a bombshell, it doesn't just move legal chess pieces, it moves emotions. And emotions move crowds, and crowds move history. And here's the most important part of all. This ruling creates the possibility of acceleration. It accelerates media narratives. It accelerates campaign messaging. It accelerates donor behavior. It accelerates internal party